All right, welcome to another episode of Warmongers, this time just with Hochi. Kermit had to step out and we're going to take a look at Hungary, because Hungary could lose everything it has gained in the past 16 years. Orban gave a dramatic speech to the nation. So Hungarians, Russian collaborating Hungarians, we already have recordings of how they go to Moscow to get their orders. And I think that only someone who really doesn't want to see collaboration in this would fail to see collaboration. What do you say?
I agree. Here, Hungary seems to me kind of like Belarus a decade ago,
Mm-hmm.
when Lukashenko tried to play both sides, both the West and the East, and it didn't work out for him, and he ended up with Russia.
It's because Hungarians have a bit of a peculiar way of approaching Russia. A lot of people think that Hungarians should look down on Russia because of 1956. But the problem is that, according to Hungarians, the Russians are not the ones to blame for 1956. The West is to blame for 1956 because Trianon was a Western matter. If it weren't for Trianon, there wouldn't have been 1956. Secondly, the West is to blame because Hungarians ended up in the Eastern Bloc even though they didn't choose the Communist Party, and the West did nothing for them. So if it weren't for Trianon caused by the West and the creation of the Eastern Bloc caused by the West, there wouldn't have been 1956. And besides that, there's also the blame that during the uprising, the rebels were encouraged by Western media to resist, that Western tanks would come to help them, and they didn't come. So basically, 1956 is a trauma caused by Moscow, but they put more blame on the West because of these 3 points. Are you surprised by them, or do you basically understand it?
I basically understand it. If you look at Hungarian history in the last century, there have only been 3 great leaders ruling Hungary during that whole time. It was Admiral Miklos Horthy,
Yes, a Nazi or an ally of the Nazis, that's right.
an ally of the Nazis, and interestingly, he was an admiral despite Hungary lacking a coastline.
But the Kingdom of Hungary did, so...
But the Kingdom of Hungary did, yes. And the second was the communist prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, Kadar.
Yes, Kadar and his goulash socialism.
Yes.
Which means that Hungary was one of the freest countries in the Eastern Bloc during socialism. You could do business there, ask your parents or grandparents. People used to go there for Western records, Western music, and so on. Hungary was like an island of freedom in the Eastern Bloc.
One of the islands, yes.
Yes.
The other huge island was Yugoslavia, which chose its own path of communism.
Yes.
The third who ruled Hungary for a long time is Orban, who actually managed to make his structures and people connected to his government infiltrate the entire state, from various government bodies to non-profit organizations.
Which is paradoxical because Orban's allies fight so hard against non-profits. Yet non-profits are one of the ways Orban is hijacking Hungary, the Hungarian state.
That's right.
It's also worth mentioning that the upcoming elections this Sunday will mainly be a fight, let's say, of one bastard against another. Only each is a bastard for a slightly different reason. And Peter Magyar, or Peter Magyar, is the kind of bastard that suits us more. Is that a summary you consider accurate? Because in my opinion, Peter Magyar is also quite a bastard.
I would probably agree with that. Neither Magyar nor Orban is an ideal way forward. In fact, I would even agree with the statement that Magyar is just a younger Orban. Both started the same way, both went through Orban's party. And Magyar simply sensed that the Lion King had grown old, and that it's simply necessary to bring down the Lion King so that someone new can become the Lion King.
That's right, Simbo. And do you think Magyar can win? And what would happen if he does? Because in my opinion, there's a huge risk here that if he doesn't get a constitutional majority, he'll really disappoint all those Hungarians who want de-urbanization. So in 4 years, Orban could easily come back again. That's the first point. And the second point is, if he gets a constitutional majority, then in the name of de-urbanization, he could basically Hungarianize Hungary, considering his name. Yeah, so basically he would just change the management instead of actually putting Hungary on the right path. But on the other hand, if Hungary takes the path toward the European Union and back to NATO without reporting to Moscow, it could be a step in the right direction.
And regarding the first point, I think he has a chance because people are already tired of Orban's government, which basically only led to Orban and his people latching onto the state and simply sucking out the money. Where in fact most of it simply goes to his friends he's picked up over the years. So people are really bothered by that. And you can see that in the bigger cities and even in the medium-sized cities, Peter is leading in the polls. The problem is that those polls are conducted by state agencies.
Yeah, private agencies do it. Sometimes they're connected to the state, sometimes to someone else, but they're not impartial, and they use an outdated polling method that stopped being used in the Czech Republic because it didn't handle undecided voters well. So right now, the problem is that you basically can't trust polls in Hungary at all. Yeah. Another point is that in Hungary, people are often afraid to say who they vote for because they either don't want to draw too much attention to themselves. So I would say that the support for Viktor Orban could easily be higher than what is reported in the polls. And if that support is even just 5% lower than Magyar's, if, for example, Magyar gets exactly 45% and Viktor Orban gets 40%, then given how the electoral system is set up, that is, the districts are drawn exactly to suit Orban, then Orban can win. It's because, for example, if you have a city or an area that would vote for Magyar or that traditionally doesn't vote for Orban, then this area might be split up and connected with another area that votes for Orban more often. And based on that, when there are those single round races, because in Hungary, half of the parliament, or actually more than half of the parliament, is elected in the same way we elect the Senate. So when those areas are divided up like this on purpose, there's a bigger chance that Orban will win, because it's divided in a way that gives Orban's party an advantage. So Peter Magyar has to win by at least 7, 8, or 9% to actually have more members of parliament than than Orban, and to become prime minister.
All right, so the system is deliberately divided like that to benefit Orban's party. Those single member districts, so they're primarily filled by people from Orban's party because, well, the voters just elect them there. They're mostly just small towns, villages that support Orban. Next, another step that helps Orban is that he gave voting rights to Hungarians living outside Hungary.
Yeah, that's around 400,000 people, right?
300,000, it's in Slovakia.
300,000 in Slovakia, yeah.
Yeah, including neighboring countries. There's a huge minority in Romania.
So let's say that maybe 500,000 votes could come from abroad and they'll vote for Orban more often than Hungarians in Hungary do because they got that right from him and he fights for their interests and he talks about Greater Hungary, right? Hungarians don't know the word Uhersko.
Yes, that's right, yeah. A lot of these people tend to vote for Orban. If we look at ourselves and our elections, about 80 or 90% of people voting from abroad are more pro-European and more liberal than the people who would actually vote for a party like Babish's or the Motorists' Party. But in Hungary, it's the opposite. The majority here vote for Orban, and the more liberal ones mostly vote for the socialists, who get about 5 to 8%.
Yeah, that's right. We also talked about what makes Hungary the way it is. I discussed 56 their stance on Russia and how they're essentially a Russian fifth column. That 1956 should have freed them from that, but it doesn't because they blame the West for it. But here's another reason why they are currently pro-Russian, and it's not so much because they have any sentiment towards the Russians, but simply because they perceive that the Russians could help them restore Greater Hungary. From a Czech perspective, it may seem absurd to want to restore Greater Hungary. Yeah, at most, we occasionally feel some sentiment for Czechoslovakia, and the Slovaks make it very, very, very easy for us not to have it. So thank God for them, that they make it so easy for us. And otherwise, we have nothing here to refer to. Silesia was once part of the Bohemian crown, but that was a long time ago. So we just don't have anything like that there. Whereas Hungarians really have it in their living memory, living memory, they simply have it encoded in their DNA that Slovakia just isn't Felvidek, you know. That Romania, half of it is Romanian, half is Hungarian, that their nation is just scattered there. And it's really not some kind of parodic nationalism that we sometimes see. Honestly, I'm not sure, I can't say right now, but you know, that kind of parodic nationalism, like when I say, let's get in the tanks and occupy Bratislava, right? Of course, we don't mean it seriously. It's more like, it's just a joke, like 90% of the time. We could occupy Bratislava, but 90% of the time, it's just a joke. But the Hungarians really take it seriously, like dead serious, this whole restoration of the old Kingdom of Hungary thing. And that's true for university students, as well as more liberal Hungarians, and the more conservative ones too. They just miss Greater Hungary. And that's why there's such hostility towards Ukraine. Because first of all, they know that Ukraine has part of their historical territory which they would like to have back. And overall, there is historical intolerance towards Ukrainians. Well, the problem isn't that Hungarians love Russia. They just want Ukrainian territory and they hate Ukraine. So that's why they're pro-Russian, basically. Yeah, the result is similar to when Fico collaborates, but Fico collaborates because he's basically a Russian puppet, whereas Orban collaborates because he has imperial interests.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Like, the Hungarians were used to the fact that their territory was simply bigger, and therefore they could project more power. In the morning, they lost 60 or 70% of their territory, which they had controlled for a millennium, which is quite a long time. But at the same time, I would say it's not that they hate Ukrainians and that's why they're pro-Russian, but rather they see it as the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the enemy of my enemy will sell me oil cheaply.
Yeah. Yeah, so according to you, there's really no hostility toward Ukrainians, that the problem doesn't actually come from Ukraine, but it's purely a geopolitical thing, right?
I think it's purely a geopolitical thing. And Orban cleverly spreads fear so that people will vote for him. And that's why the argument about Ukraine, that Ukraine is a huge enemy and that Zelensky wants to take over Hungary, is so strong. If you walk through a part of Budapest, you'll see posters on every corner with Zelensky, von der Leyen, and others smirking.
Yeah, those people are perceived completely differently there than they are here, you know? Here, Zelensky is mostly seen in a positive light, and if anything, he just annoys you by always asking for money. And von der Leyen is seen here more as incompetent, but in Hungary, she's presented as someone who just wants to control you. Yeah, like,
Yes.
it's just a completely different sentiment towards these people. A completely different presentation.
That evil Brussels that orders us around and wants to control us all.
It seems a bit short-sighted to me, considering how extremely close the elections are, that our government goes to Hungary and supports Viktor Orban, because it seems really risky to me. You don't really have much to gain by supporting Orban. If you hadn't supported him, I doubt he'd seek revenge. If you support Orban and the Hungarian wins, he can later throw it back in your face.
And in my view, our government supports Orban because if Orban wins, countries like Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary will have a stronger voice in the European Union. Because if Orban loses, the only voice left is Fico, who is in complete European isolation. And Czechia,
But Orban as well?
and that's true, but Orban is able to block some things from the European Parliament. In exchange for some concessions, we've seen it several times that the Hungarians regularly block all aid to Ukraine. But a few times it happened, not that they voted in favor, but that they simply left the meeting. The package could then be approved by vote in exchange for some concession.
Yeah, I understand.
Slovaks are more like they just take advantage of it. And it's not like a strong ally in the European Union.
What I find extremely interesting is that Viktor Orban is probably the only politician in the world who, when he runs in an election, gets a call from Trump wishing him good luck. And Putin calls him and wishes him good luck. And maybe he even sent a text message, yeah. Which I find really interesting.
It's the only phenomenon like this in the European Union, yeah, as far as I can remember.
I'm not sure if it's the only one in the world, though. But at the same time, it's a sign that in Hungary there's some type of government that appeals to the Russians. Or in some way suits the Russians. And at the same time, it appeals to the United States. And that could give us a chilling signal that the United States is actually impressed by the Russian way of running a country. And they would like to have it too. Mainly referring to Trump's administration, right? It's kind of a confirmation.
I would specify it a bit more. Yes, I agree with what you said. But I would specify it more because the Russians support Orban because he has been dealing with them in some way for 16 years. He is their contact in the European Union. So they also get information from him. And Hungary regularly blocks those aid packages for Ukraine. That's like Russia's stance. And America, or rather, the current administration in the United States supports these kinds of nationalist governments throughout Europe.
Because it divides the European Union.
Yes, because it divides the European Union and that sense of unity. Yeah, we could see it with Le Pen. There, it was also just supported by Trump supporters. And at the same time, it was also supported by Russia with a considerable amount of money.
Sure, but not exactly publicly, right?
Not publicly.
Not publicly. And there's also a difference here because Le Pen obviously ran for office, but she wasn't in power. Here it's literally a prime minister in power who is supported by both Russia and America. And you said it right, that Russia supports him because he plays into their hands. Whereas America supports him because a weakened European Union is in the interest of the United States. Which, by the way, is another piece of information that actually works for us and is being confirmed. That if anyone had doubts about whether Americans mind a strong European Union or whether Americans would want to have a strong European Union, here is confirmation that this is not the case. They want the European Union to be as weak and divided as possible. That's why they support Orban.
Orban, if you look at the projection of that influence, you can notice a pattern where both Russia and America support the same people, but for different reasons. Both Russia and America have supported Le Pen in France, supported AfD in Germany, and support Orban in Hungary. They support PS as well. In Poland, and they supported...
Does Russia support peace? That doesn't seem right to me.
Not sure about Russia, but definitely America.
Yes, that's right, that's right.
I've seen something about Russia, but I don't want to say it outright.
I think with Russia, it was something like Russia doesn't target because it knows it's pointless. So in Poland, they don't target any pro-Russian sentiment, but instead target the conservative camp. That, it's more about the culture war there, conservatives versus liberals, and they support the ultra-conservatives against the liberals.
Yes, you're right.
So that's how it is, yeah.
That's why in Poland it also meant the rise of fascism. When the party, I can't recall the name right now, but the fascist party got about 10 or 12% of the votes.
That's true, yeah.
In conservative and Catholic Poland, which was really interesting.
But that's not surprising, right? All right. Anyway, we'll be rooting for the Hungarians. I'll be there on Sunday, so if you're interested in the Hungarian elections, catch me on the radio or on TV on Sunday and we'll see how it all turns out. Ladies and gentlemen, write in the comments what you think of Hungarians. All right? Write in the comments who you're rooting for in Hungary, and I'll see you next time. Support the content, like, share, and take care. Join the streams.